Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Data Park webinar. This is Paul Hickey.
And this is Aaron Mosier. Thank you for joining us today.
We're going to be talking about trend basics, and this is actually Trend Basics 2, the second in a series on going through the fundamentals of the trend display. As always, if you have any questions during the webinar, type them into the questions panel, and we'll look at those either during the webinar or at the end. We'll have some time for Q&A. And if you have any audio issues, let us know, or try redialing into the audio or reconnecting to the meeting. And we also want to let you know that we're recording this webinar, as we always do, and we'll have that webinar available on the customer portal later today or tomorrow. And if you missed the first in this series, don't worry, nothing that we're going to talk about today is going to build off of that, but you can find that original webinar on the customer portal.
Thank you, Paul. Today we're going to, as Paul mentioned, it's going to be the second iteration of a Trend Basics course or webinars. And today we're going to cover time navigation, so how you move back and forth in the trend, zoom in, zoom out, etc. We're going to talk about the trend opening and updating behavior. So when you first open a trend, how is it going to look? Why is it loading that time span? And then also kind of how it updates while a trend is open in current mode. And then another thing related to time navigation and a way to look at time and trend is the run browser. So we're going to go over that again and how the run browser is used and what you could do with it and how it's kind of affecting what times you see in the trend. So sorry, I have a bit of a cough, so you might hear me coughing through this, but I'm going to start with this, the single continuous time span. So that's going to be the time axis that you have on the trend. So in there, and I'll show it in a second, we have labels that are showing the time intervals and on the time axis, as well as the time picker, and that's going to be either pick some absolute dates and time or take a time span. I'll get into the navigation buttons, so that's how you can kind of jump yourself back and forth in time, and then also going into zooming in time. So if I go over to Park View, I'm going to start by going to the tag browser and just picking some tags I'm going to use in a trend. So if I double click on one, I can drag some additional ones into that trend. So this is a basic trend of just a few tags in there. So now it's kind of talking about the ways you can navigate in time and what you see in time. So what we have here is at the bottom of the trend, you have your time axis. So down here at the bottom of the trend, we have our time axis. And right now, since I'm only looking at 8 hours, as we can see right there, I'm seeing my time axis in about hours. So I have my 4:30, my 5 o'clock, 5:30 going across there. And then we also have our time picker in the middle. We have some navigation buttons on the sides, and also there you get the date. So I can see that I'm looking at 5/17/2018, and I can see I'm going from about 3:30 to heading out to about 11:30 this morning, and then out here you have 11 o'clock at now. So navigating within that trend, you have a number of options. So the bar down here at the bottom, where we have the dates, I can actually drag that back and forth. So one of the simplest ways to move in time is just to left click on that and drag it back and forth. Now when I go backwards in time, we'll see that my date's right here where it says 5/16/8. Somebody know that they're not looking at current time, and I'm looking at the past. Now we also have our time picker in the middle. So this tells you first of all what is the span of time you're looking at. Then it also gives you the ability to pick some other default time spans. So for example, I could change it to a 3-day window, or I could change it to a 7-day window and expand my time there. But this is also a box I can type into. If I type in 10M, for example, I'm going to now get a 10-minute trend. Or I could type 10H and get hours, or 10D to get days. So the shortcuts we use is like S for seconds, M for minutes, D for days, H for hours, and everything else is kind of a function of days. If you wanted to get 3 years, that you would go for that many days. Then we have a couple custom ones in here, which is like month to date, and that will always be from the first of the current month till now. I could go to last month. As you see, I don't have data going beyond there, but it lined myself up with last month. And then I could even go back to the first. Our little training here was only started a month ago, so we don't have much a full set of data in there. Now, you also have your buttons here in the middle that help get you. U undoes the last change I did. So it's kind of like an undo button. X just resets myself. I go back to my default of 8 hours, and it gets me back on current time. Now the time is the navigation buttons over here on the left and the right. I have 2 of them. One is a double back button. So every time I do that, it doubles my time span, leaving the left side or the right side where it was, and always adding data going into the past. So every time I click that, I get twice as much data going backwards. Now the one next to it is a pan. So right 3 at the middle. Each time I click words and I walk my way past. Then it has the same buttons on the other side. I can move forward again. I could double into the and myself back and forth. Get my X and get myself. Now everything I've done right now has been either moving, so let's go make time smaller. We want to zoom in on stuff. And that's a left click and drag. So just like you're trying to drag a file. And it's also pretty useful because you do get what span you highlighted and the left and right timestamps of that span. So some people, how far was that? Once I've highlighted it, a Z button down here, and I can click on it, and alternately I could right click top. That I do it more often now is if I highlight a region and hit a space bar, I can zoom in. As you see, as I zoom in more and more, going down I can hit my. The last way to zoom is zooming in two directions instead of. If I hold my shift key down and drag a box, I'm now making a box that will zoom me in on the time axis and the vertical axis. And now my min and maxes are changing too. So hold down the shift key, highlight a region, hit the Z button, hit the space bar, and you zoom in on both directions. Now the last way I'm going to show you to move in time is if I come down to the time spans here, a lot more detail, so I get that times down to the millisecond technically. But if I left click on it, I get a time selector. And now I can come in here and go pick, say, the 1st of May to the 2nd of May, and I jump down to exactly that time span using that time picker. And same thing if I'm on the right side. If I left click on that, I get my time picker, and I can get myself back. So in a simple single trend, this is kind of all the different time movements you can use. Linear connected scale together.
Right, so then the next thing we wanted to talk about is synchronizing your trends, because more often than not, you're working in a multi-trend, right, where you can get more tags on the screen. You're using one span to use to investigate to find a period of time that's of interest, and then synchronize all of your other trends in the multi-trend to that time period. So let's take a look at that. Open up an example of a multi-trend here. So let's use some of the stuff that Aaron just showed us and double back in time a little bit and find a period of time where our tag values look interesting, and go ahead and zoom in. And so now one of my trends in this multi-trend has its own time span. It's no longer marching in time with all of the other trends. Synchronize these trends would be to right-click on the trends plot area. In fact, since these two options work so often in conjunction with each other, they're right next to each other in the menu. If I choose sync, now all of the other trends will jump to this time span. And that's a one organization. And it is important to remember that the trend is going to use the trend that you right-click. So if I change the time span of this trend and choose sync, now its time span is the one that's driving all the others. So I could reset my time span, and then with another sync, get all of my trends back to their. So that would be a way to have it on demand. The option right beneath sync is auto sync, just like it sounds. When this is enabled, now all of the trends are going to stay synchronized automatically. So one of the individual trends will be reflected in all of the others. Obviously, this is pretty cool. It does come with a potential performance hint, because now rather than using one trend to kind of be the one that's requesting the data and then automatically jumping everything to that one time period, you're kind of using all of the trends simultaneously. And for that reason, if you just turn auto sync on and then close out your trend or save it, it won't stick. There is a way to set that in properties, and we'll take a look at that later. The other way that you can actually synchronize is between, so for example, to open here. Go and put these aside. Aaron showed you the time label on a trend. Go and make this bigger so I can actually see it. You'll find out the trend will hide and show certain things based on the size of the trend. So this time label where Aaron was showing you the trend and we clicked it to open up the time picker is also a object. So for example, if I zoomed into a period of time here on this trend and then drag and drop from the time label onto another trend, it's going to apply that time span to the trend that I dropped on. So that's one way to synchronize between multi-trends. Another way that's used is a lot of times when people are working in a multi-trend and they want to pick one as the driver, they'll double click to clone and use this, for example, as the trend that you want to use for your time navigation. And now I can't synchronize from this clone back to the trend behind it, but I can drag and drop the time and then synchronize that way. One more just thought on the topic of synchronizing trends, because we get this question somewhat often, is embedded trends in a graphic. Is there a way to synchronize those? Not through the right click or synchronization right now. The copy time span would be one way to do it on demand, or put code behind your graphic and do it through scripting.
Okay, so some things to consider, and we've kind of mentioned and touched upon it as we've been discussing things, is that trends reload old data when touched. So our time movements that we were doing is asking that trend and your client to go out and reread the data from history. And So that's different than a current update, and we'll talk about that later. It's actually a complete reread from history. So then we have, when that's happening, you have a loading wheel in the middle. So you know that it's loading data and waiting on data. And I'll show you that loading wheel in a second. But it gives you the ability to cancel your load, stop your request in case, and a common one for me is I'll go and look at something, I want to go look at data in last year in 2017, and I'll change one date from 2017 days, I really wanted 30 days. So I will hit the cancel and then fix my data entry error. And so that's kind of some of the best practices. Another one is if you float over that wheel, you're going to see what tags it's waiting for. And one of the powers of Data Park and ParkView is we can interface with multiple historians, multiple data sets, multiple databases, and be a great way to pull in data from different sources. But that means some of your sources might be coming from our historian or a third-party historian and are very fast. Some of them could be coming from a very antiquated old system and coming in very slow. So by floating over the spinning wheel, you're going to find out, okay, I'm waiting for the tag, and that may point to a certain source and tell you, okay, that's a slow tag, and maybe if that's not important to my investigation, I can move it from my trend and speed it up, maybe drag it back in once I've zoomed in on a time period, or a couple options like that. So if I jump over to a trend, and let me set this up for auto sync. There we go. And if I ask for 30 days, depending on how this webinar is refreshing for all the users, we can see the spinning wheel. And if I catch myself over that spinning wheel, I can see what it's waiting for. And I can even see it load those tags in because that list shortens up. And if I'm quick, I can literally cancel. I wasn't quick enough. I can see if I can cancel the reads before it finishes getting the data in. And kind of each time it is, and for compression and some plot reduction type stuff can happen, is you are telling it you want a different set of data, a different span, and you want to make sure it loads that data in. So in case you missed it when I was trying to pull it in, we do have a slide of what that little spinning wheel will look like. It has an X in the middle, and if you float over that X, it will tell you what tag you're waiting for it to load.
Okay, so continuing in that vein, Aaron mentioned it a little bit. How does a trend actually then update and get new values when the user is not interacting with it? And that's what we call the current mode and the trend. And really a trend is in current mode whenever the end time of the trend is greater than or equal to now. So there's no toggle that you do. It's just as soon as you put the trend into not looking at the current time range, it stops updating the plot area. The current value column that you see in the tag info grid will always have that current value in it. And then finally, the trend lines, depending on the way those trend lines are being drawn, will actually build in real time as well. And I'll try to show you that. So let's go back to ParkView. This will work. So right now I'm in my default time span. I clicked the X button to get to my default. And so we're in current mode because the end time is actually greater than now. You might be wondering why would that be? Well, the way the trend works is we leave a certain period of time on the right-hand edge for current values as they come in. And that's being set by something called the normal future percent property in trend configuration. And so what will happen is if you just sat here and watched this in real time, the trend lines would build out to the very right-hand edge of the display, and then it would shift again by that normal future percentage. Another thing to keep in mind is that the actual end time of the trend can be in the future. In fact, most often is because of that normal future behavior. So right now, the end time of the trend is actually 11:44 in the morning here on the West Coast. And since we have an 8-hour trend, our start time is exactly 8 hours prior to that. So the implication is, just so you're aware, even though this says it's an 8-hour trend, our start time is not exactly 8 hours from now. If that's important to you, especially in things like taking a look at quick statistics and what time interval those statistics are being calculated over. You can always, of course, come into the start end time picker and pick exactly the time span that you need. Okay. Let's go and take a look in properties at that normal future percent. When I opened the trend configuration window from the plot area, right click, it took me right to the trend config tab, which is where we want to be. The normal future percent property, here it is. So for example, just to illustrate, right now our default is 5, meaning it's going to reserve 5% of the space, and then once that's filled up, it'll shift it back another 5. For example, if I put in a normal future of 50 with an 8-hour trend, now my trend lines are going to fall right in the middle of the display, and I have another 4 hours ahead of it in the future. To take a look at the way the updating works, the way you can do this is to come in and set your normal future to something small. I'll put it back to 5, and I'm going to set my refresh rate to something unreasonably quick, like 2 seconds. Hit apply, and then really drill in down here. And I want to turn on dots for all tags so we can see where our points are. And then we can watch those trend lines build. If I scoot my trend so that those trend lines are almost to the edge, we'll wait and see when those trend lines hit the actual edge of the screen there. Now we get a quick shift, and then they would continue to go forward until it hit again. So you see here, the trend is actually, always in real time, whether or not those values are coming in. So another thing to keep in mind. And also the way this trend line behavior is configured, right now the lines will always continue to build, and that's based on the tag's draw mode in the trend. If you're curious where that's set, that's on the tag configuration, because it's a tag specific property. So these are all a draw mode of regular, which will again continue to build that line out from the last known point. Exception would be the same type of draw mode, except not doing that. That is only plotting on exception or when we get new values. There's examples of all these draw modes and how they behave in the help manual if you're curious or want to take a look at a picture of that. One more thing to mention, everything I just described is what we would call the default behavior for a trend in terms of its update, but you can actually control the way that tags update by source. So this is something you have to come into system configuration for, because it is a system-wide change, and like I just said, it is a source change as well. So on the source tab, for any given source or data interface that you're pulling into ParkView, in its configuration, way on the right-hand side, there's a column called Access Mode, and this is where you would change the way the trends pull in values. So right now everything is 0, and that's our default, where left untouched, the trend only pulls current values. It loads the historical values one time and then doesn't touch them again unless the user refreshes the time span. The other options here, one will give you a mixed mode, where the trend will read current values from something called the snap files, or it would be a current value query for a SQL source, essentially the way we're pulling current values in by default. And then it will also reload all the data in history. So a little bit of an impact on performance, but you can use that to catch stuff that doesn't come in through the current query if you're having an issue with that, or MDE tags. So maybe for your MDE source, you would set this up. And the final mode is actually for, if you type in a value of 2, is all historical. It ignores the current values in terms of how we pull it in. It's only reading from history. So kind of getting into the weeds a little bit there, but that's an example of how configurable things are in ParkView, and how when you really dive into them, you can find out how they're put together and get what you want in terms of the behavior of the trend. And speaking of behavior, Aaron's going to talk about what sets the time span of a trend when you open it.
So that gets complicated because a number of things can really determine the default time span of the trend. So saved trends can have a default time span, and they're going to inherit a global system setting or an almost global system setting when you first create it or launch it. Like if you're in the tag browser and you just double click, or if you go right click new trend and create a new trend, it's going to get this default time span. And then that's changeable, of course. And so if you change the default time span in the configuration of a trend, then now when you launch that trend, it's going to be the new time span, whatever one you had picked when you saved it. Now, certain pop-up trends, depending on where they're coming from, may have the system default time span, may have a client-specific default time span, or they may actually be, the time span is driven by where they're launched. Because if you're in our alarm list display, or if you're in our centerline display and you choose a specific run and you say launch, it's going to get those time spans. So let's go through demonstrating a couple of those. So for example, if I go out to a folder and right click and say add display and trend, and then I double click on that, it's going to have 8 hours at the bottom. That ends that again is going down to the configuration of the properties for the trend. I can change that field right up there, and it defaulted to 8 hours, but if I change it to 12 hours, that will become the new default for this trend. And if I save it, come and open it, of course, now it's a 12-hour trend. So you can customize what those trends do. And if you're in a multi-trend, I, of course, can make each of these have their own starting interval as well. So I can mix a 12 and a 4-hour and etc. And again, I guess as a pro tip, if I was in a display and I built it out and I'm like, I wish they were all 4 hours instead of 12 hours, is you can go to properties, set this one to 4 hours, and then you come over to the apply to all tab, and I say default time span, and I could apply that to all the trends in the multi-trend, apply it to every single trend that I have client, and of 6 hours or 4, update a whole set of trends to that. So I apply that to all of them and go closed. And if I were to save this, open and close it, they are all now 4-hour windows of time. So that's how you can kind of change the default settings. Now, where did I get that 8 hours from? Again, you have to go to System Config, and there's a tab on near the end here called System Defaults. And this is where you can set global system defaults for a system for every user of ParkView. And one of them in here is trend default span, and the number's in seconds. So that means all new trends will always be that number of seconds, whether or not you're launching them from ParkView or from tag browser or certain places where you double, like in a graphic, if I double click on a tag, it'll launch a trend, and this is where it gets its time span. Now let's say as a site, you're all like 8 hours, but as a user, you don't. There is a client config setting. So if you see up here on the taskbar under File, there's a client, and there's some user preferences. Right? Where are the settings? Trend. Sorry, trend. I can come and set my own default time span of 4 hours. So then now for this client, it would use 4 hours for all my trends. And if I save that, Now I'm overriding the sites setting, and then for this PC, this user would be using 4 hours for all my displays. Now I also mentioned some of the ways that you can different displays might give you different time spans when you launch it. So this is my centerline display. It's set up to do product runs. So each column is a different period of time. This is 8:50 to 9:55. This column's 8:13 to 8:50. Well, if I right click on one of these and choose trend, it will then open up a trend for the time span of that column. So in this case, it's actually getting the time span from my launching display and showing these times based on what run I launched it from. If I choose a different run and go trend, I'll get a different time span. So these will launch to be the time span of the run. Now the final way that you can control your launch behavior, let's go back to my new trend here. Let's get some tags in it just so we can see some wiggly lines. I can set the absolute start time of a trend. So let's say there was, some incident that happened, and I would want to zoom in on that incident. And now I want to save this trend so I can maybe bring it up in a meeting or bring it up as an example to somebody, but I don't want to pan backwards and find it again. I can right click, go to my properties, and I can set these absolute start and end times. So if I hit fill times, it will use whatever that trend was set to. And then when I go OK and I save it, if I go out here and open that trend will now always open to that saved interval there, regardless of what is my new now or where I've kind of moved ahead in the future. So that's another way that you can change your opening behavior as well in a trend or a display.
Okay.
So back to Paul.
So that was everything we could think to talk about manipulating a trend with a single time span. So now we're going to hop over to talking about Run Browser. And this is the main idea here is loading multiple time periods into a trend for viewing a comparison, simultaneously. We got them all together in the same trend. And those can be non-continuous periods of time. So for example, the last 5 times crew A was working, or the last few times the night shift was on. Meaning as if they happen one after the other in the trend, even though they may be separated by time, or we can actually overlay the runs in a compare mode. And just like a normal trend, a trend in run mode, as we would call it, when the run browser is driving the time span, does have notions of auto-loading those runs, and also can be in a current mode. So you can set a run trend up to be what I call passive display, where the users don't have to interact with it, and it's always going to be showing them the same type of data that they expect. Before I hop into Parkview, I just want to do a quick conceptual slide here to talk about what I mean when I say run or run browser or periods of time. And really, it's just any period of time that you're interested in capturing and want to look at your data or chop up your data over those intervals. And in Parkview, we have what we call 2 types of runs, or process runs and time periods. So examples of process runs are really periods of time that are how long you were making a certain type of thing, or how long you spent making an individual unit of production, or phases within that production, versus time periods, which are going to be non-varying lengths of time. Runs or time periods is for process runs, they're generated by tag values. So a tag is telling us when a new grade run starts, or when a new product or batch starts, or when we hit certain phases within a batch. So that's coming from a tag versus the time periods, which are either implicit or we have them generated in our SQL database. So the implicit time periods are like hour or day, because we all mostly agree on when the hours of the day are. And then what we call custom time periods are those that are specific to your site or the way your operation runs. So production weeks, fiscal years, production days if you're on like a 7 to 7 or 8 to 8, and then also however complex a crew or shift schedule you have, we can get it as long as we have a couple iterations of it stored in our database. So then you could look at your data by crew or by shift. Okay, so let's actually take a look at that. Boy, we got a lot of trends open here, Aaron.
You're never supposed to close a trend.
Yeah, that's what they say. I'm going to choose a tag from a specific process area, and I'm going to explain why in a little bit. And actually, I'm going to reopen this trend just to make sure I get what I'm expecting here. Okay. So the way to get to Run Browser is through the right-click menu. Just open up Run Browser. Okay. So I'm going to use primarily today the Run Filter tab, and this is where we are filtering for runs or finding the runs that we want to look at in our trend. The Run Browser has already made some options or choices for me here in the location and process fields. So I'm just going to go with what it picked for me, and I'll come back to those later. Right now I want to look at period type. So this is where you would choose the type of time period you want to see. So for example, if I choose hour, then I can look at the hour time periods. So once you've chosen your period type, now you need to tell the Run Browser what instances of those time periods do you want. And there's really 3 ways to do it. Ask for a certain number of runs, ask for all the runs within a given date range, or set up a moving window or a relative time window and always be getting the runs from that moving or relative time window. So those correspond to the 3 options in the filter runs by dropdown: run count, date range, or relative time. So with run count, I just say how many runs I want and where to search looking back from now a certain period of days, so we don't spend forever looking into the past for runs that maybe don't exist. So now with all of my settings, if I come up and click load runs in trend, it's going to load those runs into the trend behind. So if we take a look at that, it's not going to be super interesting because really we're just looking at the last 5 hours, which is a continuous time span. But we can see that the trend will add these yellow run dividers, so we can see where the period divisions fall. The run dividers is a configurable option. So up here in the top of the Run Browser in the trend run mode section, this is where you configure how you want the trend to load your runs. So show run dividers is just a toggle on-off checkbox. Or I can actually change, like I said, the way the runs are plotted consecutively or overlaid in comparison. So if I toggle this to being a run mode and compare run mode, let's take a look at what that shows us in the trend. So now our time axis is really showing us the total duration of the time period, hour, and now we're seeing 5 trend lines corresponding to each of the last 5 hours. And the way it works is, as you see up in the tag info grid, it's coloring the most recent run with the brightest color, and they get more dimmer as you go back in time. There are trend features that will respect Run Browser in terms of what you can look at in run mode. So first off, quick statistics is going to look a little different in run mode. So you're going to see statistics for each of those runs. And Smart Mouse will also show you different information about the value for each of those tags at this time in each of the runs. Same thing if I'm in consecutive mode. I'll go back to that. Now my quick stats, again, will show me for each of the runs. and Smart Mouse is going to show me the values at the time, and also that's going to be a run label there, which it looks like in the hour run mode, it just gives you the day, which is maybe something we should look into.
It's probably the label we have for those in the database.
Oh, that's a good point.
When we did the labeling, we never put the time, so we got 24 labels that are identical for every day.
That makes sense. Okay. So now I'm going to come back to why we need to choose a location and a process. The location picker, this just corresponds to site, and this only applies if you are in a multi-site setup. In general, if you're just working with your own site's data, you have just the one location. Process, this is where the process area tree comes into play, because as I said earlier, with those process-based runs, those come from a tag, and the way Parkview knows how to marry that up is we have what's called a process tag specified at the process area level. And so the easiest way to look at that is going to be to take a look at tags that come from a process area that has grades. Okay, so just to review the concept of grade, what we mean by grade in Parkview, it's really, it's type of product is how it's often used. So for example, in this trend, we have this grade tag that's telling us where our different grade runs fall. And we can tell just from looking at the tag limits we have set up, our tag limits are varying between grade type, meaning that we're interested in viewing and analyzing our data or controlling our process differently based on the type of product we're making. And so I guess generally speaking, a grade is any condition you're interested in capturing. So here it's a specific change in the type of product that's being made, but it could be more general than that, like for example, chopping up your data by rate of production, whether or not you're running the machine fast or slow or medium. You could chop up your data by a season of the year, or a season where you're making a certain type of thing, season or campaign, or even if you have changes to your process or your methodology that you want to capture in history. So for example, if you switch to using a different chemical additive or a new piece of equipment or something along those lines, and you want to then be able to capture that in your historical analysis. Okay, so I had to explain all of that in order to make sense of what's going to happen when we come into the run browser and are looking at a process area that has a grade tag configured for it. So earlier we didn't see this because we were looking at a tag from our boiler process area, which the boiler is just making steam 24/7. We're not interested in analyzing it any differently than that, compared to tags from this process area where we are interested. So for a process area, in this case PM2, our period type picker is going to have a couple additional period types available, and that's because we have a product tag and we have a grade tag to use. One way to tell is actually in the trend. If you right click on a tag and go to tag info, you can find out all of its process unit information right here. So for example, what process area is it even assigned to, and then do we have and what are the grade tag, product tag, and so on. So in Run Browser, I can obviously filter for grade runs. So if I choose a period type of grade, now I'm going to use my grade filter, and it's going to ask me what grade I want to see. So the first option is going to be current grade, so we can always keep an eye on what's going on. Load runs and trends going to work the same way. There's our last few instances of the grade we're making right now, so we can keep an eye on the current time as well as what we did previously. I can choose a specific grade or specific grades by going down the list here. We also have a notion of grouping grades together, more often used in the centerline display because it's more of a reporting tool, but it is another way to tier your grade list or create a hierarchy. Or finally, the all grades. This is the same thing as doing like no grades or not filter by grade. One thing to note when you were looking at, for example, a specific grade, this comes more into play when we talk about the run browser current mode, but I can actually look at a specific grade while also looking at the current grade or getting current data. So we can see this in our trend behind where these runs off to the left are for the specific grade I asked for, but I can see this because I have the grade tag on the trend, by the way. This is the current grade that's going on right now. So another way to keep an eye on what's currently happening while looking at those older runs. The final piece to the puzzle here with the grade filtering is we can do grade filtering by product runs for a given grade, or if I wanted to filter by looking at production days when we were making certain types of grades. So that's why if you're in Run Browser and you're looking at a period type that isn't grade, why we still have the grade filter here available, because we think you may want to do that. If you don't want that behavior, again, come down and choose all grades, and just remember all grades is kind of like no grades. So now let's look at Run Browser behavior in a multi-trend. So I can, just like I could synchronize trends, if I come in and decide I want to look at, for example, day shifts, not filtered by grade, and the last 5. If I check off apply to all up in the load run behavior section, now when I load those runs, it's going to load them in all of my trends simultaneously. So that's apply to all. If I wanted it to do that on load, that's what this checkbox down here does. It's kind of hiding at the bottom of the list, but what we assume is go through the whole panel, get all your settings set up for the run filter, and then say I always want it to do this when I open up my trend. So check off auto run filter when display is loaded, and then make sure you save your browser configuration, because this is what's going to save that browser config to the trend. And the final piece would then be the current mode, which is just a checkbox up here right next to the apply to all trends. And the way that works is you'll see that we leave a little bit of space, kind of like we do when the trend is in current mode or when it's in its default time span. And so the current run will continue to build in this area. And then as soon as it finishes, the oldest run will drop off your trend and then be replaced by the new one. If you're in run count. If you're in the date range mode, it'll just fit all the runs in within the same date range and so on. So it'll respect your run browser settings while continuing to march forward in time.
And if you are doing grade runs and the grade changes, then all the runs will disappear. A new set of grade runs will show up and it will march forward, correct?
Yes. Because if you have it set to current grade, when the current grade changes, it'll reload. It'll respect that setting, definitely. So in terms of what you can do with a trend in run mode, there is one more thing I want to show, or a couple more things actually. I have some notes here. So in a consecutive mode, previously you've seen me double clicking on trends and popping them up. What happens if you double click a trend that's in consecutive run mode is you're actually going to get a trend of just that run. So kind of like we were doing from Centerline earlier, I can pull up a trend of just the run that I want to see here. Or let's see if I can go back to I'm going to put this trend back into compare mode. Oh, here's something that's interesting. Can you have more than one run browser open? No, we want to keep things in order. So if you have run browser open somewhere else and you try to open it in a different trend, it's going to ask you, do you want to close the old one and open up this one? So I'll say yes. The reason for that, though, is actually right now, all of my trends are in the same run mode because I have apply to all checked off, but that doesn't have to be the case. So I could load, for example, day shift runs in one trend, and I could come over and open a different run browser and open night shift runs in this trend. So that is something to be aware of. You can make them all march together, or you could choose to have different runs loaded in different trends. And the last thing I want to show is to come back and put a trend in compare mode. I'm going to drop down to one tag just to make this easier. So let's look at the last, let's say a few instances of the day shift. Look at it in compare mode. So as I said earlier, our default coloring scheme is to start bright and then get dimmer. You can actually change these colors though if you wanted to. So if you wanted to uniquely identify any of these runs, you could sit and change the color so it pops a little bit more on the screen. And then of course you can always hide and show the trend lines individually by left clicking on the color box, or if you actually hold the control key and left click, it's going to hide everything except for one. So again, any of the trend functionality you're familiar with should work when in run mode. So you can always remember to utilize those. A couple more things to show. This was a question I saw recently about looking at different types of time periods on the trend. And the run browser isn't built to do that in an automated fashion, but you can make it do it. So what am I talking about? Let's say I wanted to look at day shift compared to night shift yesterday. I could choose to filter my day shift time periods. I'll get the last 5, maybe just the last 2. And rather than loading them in the trend directly, I can choose to send runs to grid. So what this is going to do is it's going to populate the runs grid tab with the runs I asked for. Now I can choose which ones I want to actually put in the trend. So for example, if I drag in yesterday's day shift and then came back to my run filter and switched over to night shift and send runs to grid again, I can grab night shift and put that on there as well. And now I'm looking at my day shift compared to my night shift for this tag right on my trend. If this won't necessarily update because this is kind of a hybrid mode, but just something you could do one time for analysis. Last thing, I actually learned this recently. When you're, this goes back to our synchronization, when a trend is in run mode, you can actually choose to sync trends to run. So it is very similar to the apply to all, except this would let you use one trend and then maybe in a mix and match choose whether to sync. So a new synchronization option when you're in trend and run mode. Okay, that was everything we could come up with. So let's see anything that you all had for us in terms of questions.
So Paul, we had one question is how do we define the period types? And I know you went over different ways to do it, but if they're the fixed period types, such as production day, production week, fiscal, and whatnot, that all happens through system config. And what you need or we need to set that up is like kind of one valid iteration. So production day is easy, 7 to 7, we need 1 day. Crew schedules, night shift, day shift, we need an iteration so we can propagate that forward. Other periods like grade and product and phase are all driven by tags. And you just have to have a tag in your system or build a calculated tag sometimes that represents when a product, grade, phase, whatever changes, and that becomes the driving force. And so along those lines, somebody asks, can the period type of the run and the time browser be event triggered? For example, a product cycle tag. So that's right, that would be the product tag in the process area, right?
Mm-hmm. So in our system configuration, and we do actually have a webinar on process configuration if you want to go look that up on our customer portal, but just to show you within your process tree, and really this is kind of a lot of what makes up the definition of a process area is the actual grade tag or basis value tag and the product tag, and another tag we haven't talked about today called the filter tag or downtime tag, which is just removing a downtime from statistics and calculations and things like that. Because that's really the idea of a process area, is just a container for tags that are all involved in making the same type of thing at the same time. So that's why a grade tag and a product tag and a filter tag are going to apply to all those tags in the process area. And again, we showed this already, but it is worth just reminding you of anytime you have a tag and a trend, you can right click and come to the tag info and see those process tags if they've been defined. And in fact, from this tag info window, you can drag and drop them. So if you want to visualize what they look like, there's our grade tag, product tag, and downtime tag all in the trend. So we see our grade tag in green where the grade changes happen. We see the product tag ramping up, and then we see our filter tag for any downtime that we had.
Now, given all that though, we do have the option with Run Browser is to override all those. So when you're here on the tab is, I pick PM2, and now I'm driven by this grade tag, filter tag, and product tag. But I could come over here and alternately override that. So if my process didn't have a grade tag, but I want to experiment with one, or if I just wanted to do it on a different one, maybe I built a grade tag that was seasons, and I wanted to look at as a grade tag in my system, I could override that. I could override my product tag. So in this tab, you could put in any tag you want, such as a product tag, and then a product is assuming every time that tag changes value, that's a new time period. So it makes a new trigger event tag. And then for this trend in this Run Browser, you can be using an overridden one that will be different than what it's inheriting from me picking the process. So I think that's all the questions we have. If there's any other ones that have popped in, we see a few that we're going to have to take a little more time to answer. We'll get back to you via email. And just a couple things to mention. We have our website as well as dataparksolutions.com, which you'll find our blog and more information. There's our portal, which you need access to, and you can request by going to the portal account. And that will get you downloads. That will get you the ability to download this webinar and other webinars and view them. And if you have any questions, please reach out to our DataPark support email and hit them up.
Yeah, so look forward to another invitation to a webinar coming up next month. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Great. Everybody have a good day, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from.